Thank you. Thank you for the very kind words. I do want to put in a plug for what you're doing, which I think is really important. I'm a board member of the American Sleep Apnea Association, which is the parent group of the awake groups. And I, for a long time, have been impressed that, patient input is really important. Clearly, we as doctors, do certain things. We diagnose, we treat, but ultimately, this and most chronic problems have to be treated by the patients. And so it's really important for you guys to speak to each other, as well as understand what the doctors are saying, and bring your complaints and problems back to us in various ways. And one of them, I think, is by realizing that you're not alone. So to those who are new, and I gather there are a few, I encourage you to talk to your neighbors. To those who are experienced apneics, look for people who are less experienced and pass on your words. I think that's really important. Anyhow, as to tonight's talk, I was asked to talk a little bit about the enhancements to CPAP. Okay, what does it do? And what are all these gadgets that you're constantly hearing about? So I'm going to talk a little bit about the alphabet soup that has come about. And I'm happy to make this very informal. So although I have talk that's, planned for a formal talk, if you want to raise your hand, I'll be happy to interrupt. I'd rather actually address what interests you than what interests me. I give this talk a lot, so it's much more interesting to hear your questions. Before I start, I do want to really sort of fulfill the obligation that I have to, which is to tell you that I do get royalties. There are a couple of these things that were patented that I got royalties on through NYU. We've used it to support our program, but it does come back in part to me. We work with Fisher & Paykel, among others. We've worked in the past with Tyco, now Covidien. They make CPAP machines, so you're officially on notice. Don't believe anything I say. I do consult with several other companies, including, and the yellow ones are ones that are directly affected by some of the things I'm going to say today. I'm going to try and be honest, but keep in mind that some of the things I say, not everybody agrees with. So let's start with what sleep disordered breathing, or sleep apnea in the more common term, what is it? Okay, and you all know it's something to do with collapse and blockage in the throat. Okay, this little schema is to show you sort of a cartoon of what's happening when you breathe in and when your airway collapses. So what I'm going to show you is up on top here, this is going to show flow. So in is going to look like that, and out is going to look like that. I'm going to show you one breath. And while I do that, I'm showing you this tube, which you can think of as a rubber tube, sort of a collapsible piece of tubing, a balloon if you want. And there's going to be, this is the lung, this is the nose, and this is just the upper airway. And you're going to see an animated cartoon, if you will, a very simplified version of what happens. So when we breathe in, we create suction, and that sucks in the tube. When we breathe out, it pushes the tube out. It actually opens up the blockage. So that in most cases, apnea, at least in this very simple model, and this is incredibly oversimplified, this is a problem of breathing in. Causes the airway to close. The more suction there is, the more it closes. And that's why people who have nose problems get worse apnea. Not everybody with a nose problem gets apnea, but if your nose is a problem, it causes apnea. Again, to understand why we're going to put pressure here, you have to understand what's causing, and that's why I'm showing this to you. Now, there's a lot more than all of that, but that's it. Now, what is CPAP? Okay, what do the abbreviations stand for? Well, it stands for continuous positive airway pressure. It was invented by an Australian by the name of Colin Sullivan in 1981, and it's so simple, it's almost silly. I mean, it's such a simple idea that it's a miracle we didn't think of it sooner, and it's not surprising that, at least from the point of view of the laboratory and the doctor, it works so well. So what exactly is happening? Well, the key, something seems to have happened to one of my slides there, but anyhow, what's happening here is basically you're applying one continuous pressure throughout all the cycle. And as I pointed out before, it's not clear you need it all the time or at the same level, but you just apply pressure. And why does it work? Well, it works for a very simple reason. Remember, the airway is being sucked shut during inspiration, but the reason it's being sucked shut is there's negative pressure inside and there's atmospheric pressure outside, so the wall gets pushed in. If you keep the inside positive, the wall gets pushed out, and no matter how hard you suck, it's down from a pressure that's already above atmosphere, and so it never collapses. So it can't collapse. Now, the CPAP doesn't breathe for you. That's a very important thing. It's not a ventilator or a breathing machine, except in the jargon sense. What it is, it's a way of holding the airway open. And I think Colin's words were the best ones. He called it a pneumatic splint. So it's just a way of holding the airway open. You do the breathing, it just keeps the airway open. And it really works. Okay, so let's go back to our schema and see what's happening in CPAP. Well, the first thing that happens when you apply pressure is the whole thing opens up. Your airway is actually a floppy tube. And so if you put pressure inside, it just dilates and becomes bigger. And we have pictures to show that that happens. Now when you take a breath on top of that airway, during inspiration, it can't collapse. And during expiration, since it's already pretty much maximally inflated, it can't expand. So basically, it stops being in the picture. And that's why CPAP works. It just takes all this problem up here out of the picture. And I say problem, it's only a problem. It's only a problem in some people. Our airway is, for various, I shouldn't say historical, evolutionary reasons, a very funny structure. It has to do so many things. Not only do we have to breathe through it, but we have to swallow and we have to talk. And so we evolved in such a way that it's very, very agile. It can do many things. And when something goes wrong, one of the skills that our airway has, the ability to close and collapse, turns into a penalty. And it's unfortunate, but when everything's working, that's actually good. That's why I can talk. If I had a rigid airway, I couldn't talk. Okay? I couldn't swallow. And that's why we don't have a steel pipe for an upper airway, presumably. All right, so the real question is, I've said it works. I think you've all been suitably indoctrinated if you've gone to a CPAP clinic. But the point is, it really works incredibly. And you'll forgive my enthusiasm for it, but frankly, I don't think there's any other treatment in medicine that is as effective as CPAP from a physiologic point of view, meaning from the recordings point of view. If I put CPAP on at the right pressure, you will breathe normally. You cannot collapse your upper airway in 99.9% of the cases. I don't know of any other treatment in all of medicine that is as effective. I mean, it makes penicillin for pneumonia look like kind of a blunderbuss approach. It's amazing. But there is a problem. Well, first of all, the problem is that only about 70% of the people we give it to actually use it. So the problem is not with CPAP. The problem is with its acceptability, with why people don't use it. What can we do to change that? And that's what many of these enhancements I'm going to talk about actually are directed to. Now, we didn't realize that at first. When I first started working with CPAP, and up until maybe 10 or 15 years ago, we kept looking for a better CPAP. But there probably isn't any such thing. All there is a more comfortable or more acceptable CPAP. And that's a slightly different perspective. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit about what we're trying to do and what we have and have not succeeded, and why there's so many sales gimmicks on the market. Some of them are real, some of them are good ideas, and some of them are really just fluff. Okay? So I do want to point out, when you put CPAP on and you use it, it's been shown very scientifically it improves things. It makes severe sleep disorder much better. Most people who have severe apnea, who put on CPAP and are successful in using it, feel better. They're less sleepy. We're pretty sure it improves their quality of life overall from their questionnaires and so on. That's a hard thing to measure directly, but people tell us that. We think it improves survival overall. It makes you live a little bit longer. Not a whole lot, but a little bit. We are pretty sure it reduces blood pressure, at least in certain people. Not everybody has high blood pressure who has sleep apnea. But these are things that have been carefully studied, and the statistics are pretty definitive. It really helps if you're severe.